Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Chelsea Shelley, and I'm the Head of Engagement at ACCA. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to our fourth and final webinar of our Ignite series, What's on the Digital Horizon? The aim of Ignite is to explore the key issues impacting the profession and to give you the opportunity to learn from experts, as well as connect with the ACCA member community. If you missed any of the previous sessions, we'll be making these available on demand over the coming weeks. So before we get started, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of housekeeping things. We've got a large audience today, so your microphones have been muted for this part of the webinar. But please, we'd like to encourage you to interact using the chat function. You can comment on the discussion, you can interact with each other, and you might want to connect with each other, drop your LinkedIn details into the chat. There will be time for questions today, so if you've got anything you'd like to put to the panel, you can submit that using the Q&A function that you should see a little icon for at the top of your screen. So, on to today's session. Our panel will be exploring what's on the horizon in terms of digital transformation and advancing technologies. They'll be discussing what are the opportunities for finance professionals and what skills do we need. Chairing today is Alistair Brisbane, the Head of Technology Research at ACCA. So, Alistair, over to you to introduce yourself and the panel.
Thanks, Chelsea. Really appreciate it. And it's great to have everyone here today and a really brilliant panel that I'll be discussing this very significant, very large topic today around digital skills, around artificial intelligence. And we'll have some breakout sessions afterwards as well, picking up on each of those strands. As Chelsea mentioned, I'm Alistair Brisbane. I am the Head of Technology Research here at the ACCA. We're currently conducting some research looking at the future skills that are required for the profession, trying to understand how key technologies like artificial intelligence are likely to impact us and our profession in the future. And as I mentioned, we have a brilliant panel to help me unpack this today. I think everyone can kind of feel with technology, it's amazing how quickly things feel outdated. But then we sort of move 5-10 years down the road and we sort of feel like we're back in the same place asking the same questions. And I think partially that's because our expectations can significantly exceed our actual practices. And so we're starting with skills today because transformation ultimately starts with people, not technologies. And starting with people and those skills, getting the culture right, getting the buy-in is what ultimately drives success. So we have a couple of poll questions that we'd like to start with, just to get a sense of how the audience feels about this particular subject before we dive in with some panel questions. So if we can share the first poll question, please. The first poll question is whether the finance profession currently suffers from a skills gap in relation to digital transformation. We're really curious to see what everyone thinks. So it's looking overwhelmingly positive at the moment, unsurprisingly. You will get a few more responses in. Well, it's looking like a very broad consensus here at the moment. Like 90% of people who do believe there's a skills gap in relation to digital transformation, which is good news for the topic of discussion today, certainly. See, we'll give people another couple seconds to respond to the poll if you haven't already. Well, I'd say that's pretty significant. 91% think there is a skills gap. I have a feeling that number is not going to drop significantly, even if we get everyone responding to that poll. Can we move on to the second poll question? If we sort of overwhelmingly think there is a skills gap, the question is whose responsibility is it to help correct that? So this is very interesting. It definitely looks like it falls on everyone. I think we have some people who are saying they can't see the second poll question.
The poll should be in the chat for anyone who can't see it if it's not popped up on the screen.
So this is really interesting. So it's looking like there's a general consensus that it's sort of the responsibility, sorry, lays quite broadly, but also quite heavily with senior leaders in terms of upskilling their teams. Curiously, it's quite a lot smaller people who think that the responsibility lays on the individual themselves. And no one thinks that younger generations, it's their responsibility to bring all the new skills into their organization. Brilliant. All right. Well, I think that gives us a couple of interesting reflections to kick off. I'd like to ask the panel then. I mean, reflecting on the first question, do you think there's a skills gap in relation to digital transformation? I'm going to assume that you agree with the audience. If not, then please let us know.
Alistair, I'd love to talk to the people who don't. I'd love to have that chat with them.
So please, Joshua, if you'd like to start us off, do you think there's a skills gap? And if so, sort of what are the key areas that you're looking at, that you're interested in?
Actually, that is really impressive, and that is exactly the answer that I was expecting. And especially, we're not looking at 50-60%. We're looking at a percentage that heavily weighing on the fact that yes, there is a skills gap. And okay, why? What about this mess? Why this is happening? What has shaped this skills gap? I mean, the factors are very distinct and interrelated. However, they all combined and shade the fact that yes, we do have this skill gap. I would name a few of them. So digitalization and application of emerging technologies, digital and social inequalities that is affecting opportunities to develop digital skills, traditional methods of education that is not keeping up with employers' needs for digital skills, and obviously COVID-19 pandemic, which has amplified the urgency to create conditions which effectively leverage digital solutions for virtual work and commerce, and then the technological progress that is necessitating agile skill adaptations from workers who need a range of new skills to adjust to the new marketplace and work environments. So once we used to talk about digital initiative, which has now become or escalated into a digital imperative. Now, despite the fact that we've seen digitalization in response to COVID-19 pandemic, which accelerated, but clearly digital skills gap persists in the UK organizations. I refer to a survey that recently Microsoft and Goldsmiths, University of London, conducted back in late 2020. They found out that about 70% of the leaders that were surveyed said that their organization is currently facing a digital skills gap. So now, okay, we reckon the fact that yes, we do have a skills gap, but number one is really good to recognize the fact. So at least 50% of resolution or solving a problem is recognizing the problem itself. And then the remaining part is analyzing and understanding further the types of skills that we are missing or that we need to bridge.
That's a really important point. Yeah, exactly. And I think we'd like to discuss as well at some point. We have some input on sort of how exactly we go about that. And certainly the second poll question was sort of about who has that responsibility. So Bandhu, yes, you have your hand up, please.
So firstly, I don't think it's well, I agree with I also answered yes. But I think if you ask the same question to other professions, marketing, so it's not also doom and gloom. I think everyone will say that like a skills gap. And so I am someone who started off as an accountant, then built a data science team, and now I'm in sort of the digital transformation space, using data to enable that digital transformation. One thing I can tell you that firstly, it's not so doom and gloom, and finance should not forget its value add to the business. So I'm now sitting on the other side of the table with my finance colleagues, and where I need their input is that how do I build an asset? How do I communicate that value creation? So there's a lot has finance doesn't necessarily need to have the digital skills. We don't necessarily need to code. But what we need to do is help digital peoples to think about value creation, think about risk, because that's what I am someone who's sitting on the other side. That's what I would value from my finance teams, to help me think through risk, help me think through value creation. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that point, that finance has a really unique set of skills that the organizations care about, and not just go into coding, because we can hire coders quite easily, but professionally trained accountants have a lot of value to offer in terms of understanding risks, understanding value, understanding compliance, understanding governance. So I just wanted to flag that, Alistair. I don't disagree with there is a skills gap, but every profession does, I think.
I think you made a really, really important point, that it's not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying that we need a complete refresh. It's an evolution and understanding how we get there. And I think, Lynn, I know you've made this point before, that there are a plethora of tools out there that are currently being underutilized and that we can make better use of, even just to sort of meet the current demands, let alone the demands of the future.
Absolutely, yeah, and I see this all the time everywhere I go. I think I agree with Bandhu and Joshua, everything they say, but Bandhu is talking about specialist, very, very technical skills, and I agree that you've got people at that end of the spectrum who can provide that capability. And I think what we need to do as a finance profession is meet them halfway, be able to communicate effectively between the technologists and the business stakeholders. So a chap called Wayne Eckerson wrote a blog in about 2010, which got picked up by Deloitte as a really interesting concept, the concept of the purple person. The idea being, and I think some other people were coming up with the similar kind of concept at the same kind of time, but broadly speaking, you've got technologists who you maybe define as red people, and business stakeholders and users who are blue, and they need to somehow communicate with each other. And what you find sort of appearing in the middle is these purple people who can speak both languages, who understand the capabilities of the technology on the one side, but also understand the requirements and the needs on the operational side, and can bridge that gap and do that communication piece. So yeah, Exxon came up with this term of the purple people, and I think that's what we need, is for the finance community to produce more of those purple people and come to the table with the technologists to collaborate to produce that capability. But I agree with you, Alistair, absolutely. There are lots of tools available today that can be in the hands of finance professionals, and I don't think they're getting access to for a variety of reasons. I ran a series of LinkedIn polls in the run-up to this webinar, just to reach out to my communities to kind of get a straw poll in terms of what they were using. And there's kind of an overwhelming response. People aren't making the most of Excel yet. People aren't using Power Query commonly. People aren't using task platforms. People aren't using visualization, reported BI tools. All of these things are fairly easily usable by the layperson, by the finance professional. And I think we've got a massive opportunity there to catch up with some of that stuff before you get into the conversation as regards whether we need SQL skills or Python skills or anything like that.
Mm. Yeah, I think another great example of just how our expectations exceed sort of what the practical possibilities and sort of realities of our job are. We're sort of looking well beyond perhaps what is necessary. right now.
Yeah. There will be people kind of looking to the digital horizon and looking at the AI opportunities, and there's conversations about blockchain and automation to have, but there's a whole load of stuff that people could be working on, could be using effectively right now that's a lot more straightforward and a lot more accessible.
I'm also quite curious about this idea of the purple person, and I don't know how many of our audience are familiar with the concept. I suspect quite a few have come across the idea of the purple person, or the person that has this blended skill set and can sort of act as a change agent within a department or within a business or within an organization. My question for the panel in regard to the purple person is, does this concept threaten feeding into the sort of paranoia around the lack of digital skills, or AI in particular, around there being a sort of few people who can harness these abilities and thrive in this new environment, while everyone else is kind of susceptible to automation and losing, important parts of their job? So how do we broaden out that skill set, or sort of ground it again in the sort of reality of what we're going to be doing in the future?
Who wants to take that one first? I have thoughts.
I can start if you want.
Please,
So
Bandu,
Yeah, so I think ACC has got a really fantastic course on this. Actually, someone will correct me. It's called Certificate in Data Analytics, and it introduces knowing the language is really important. I think that's the first one. What is machine learning? What is a outlier? What is back testing? So knowing that this basic language, and I think we through our professional qualifications we've managed to learn so many complex topics. This is actually probably a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 1 month, we can really get ourselves up to speed with that language, the lingo. So I will share I've got other ideas and thoughts as well. But the first one, if I sort of know the language, and it can be learned quite quickly, if you learn through examinations and etc. I think accountants love disciplined approach towards learning. I think ACC has got a really, really good course that is available, I think, right now on demand. So that would be the first tip, that learn the language. It can be done quite quickly. It's being curious.
I would add to that a reference to the Certificate in Digital Innovation in Finance that ACCA offers as well, which is a kind of a broader course that can introduce you to a variety of the sort of things that are coming down the pipe in terms of automation and digital capability. And that, again, that will share a lot of the language. I think so I recommend that one too. For me, I think in terms of trying to broaden the capability of the wider community and enable a larger kind of proportion of the community to engage with technology, my top tip, I suppose, would be to start making presumptions differently. So what I experienced through my career is that people learn a certain amount and they learn how to do things a certain way, and then they continue to do things the same way they've done them for the most part. This is the way I know how to do something, this is how I'm going to keep on doing it. The way that I've tended to approach my career is, if I faced with a problem, faced with something that needs to be done, if I can conceive of a logic to it, then I suspect there might be a more efficient way of doing it. So my presumption is it can probably be done. I just don't know how yet. I need to go find out how. And so I think there's a where you're coming at it from point there. Everyone could come into the office tomorrow and go, okay, let me take a step back from this process that's currently happening in my organisation. What if I assumed that there was a better way of doing it, rather than assuming that the way that I do it today is the only way and the best way? So that would be my tip: is be curious, go and look for the opportunities for things, because there's all sorts of stuff, really fun and exciting stuff out there that we can get our hands on.
Really interesting point. Yeah, how do you instill that mindset of experimentation rather than specific skills? Because skills are something that anyone can pick up, as you rightly point.
And I do think that that's responsibility for the senior leadership, the kind of the upper half of the community, really, to create those conditions for people to do that exploration and make it okay to fail as well. Because it's not everything is going to work. Right, you need to invest research time to find those opportunities, but not everything is always going to work. So you have to set the example, do some of it yourself and give examples of things that have worked and try and create that culture of curiosity.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because our second poll question there, our audience responded as to whose responsibility it is to help fill this skills gap. And I'm not going to pick on our audience, but I think they took the easy answer in large part, saying it's everyone's responsibility. But the second most significant response was senior leadership. And I wonder whether, I mean, then you've already sort of pointed to the important role that they can play. I wonder if Joshua Bandu, whether you have any other reflections on that, whether you agree or disagree, or think there's actually a role that other people should be playing.
So
Yeah, actually, I would like to quote a statement by Jane Dickinson. She's a digital skills lead at the Open University. So she said a commitment to digital skills at a leadership level creates a positive impact on the performance of the organization and the engagement of employees who are given vital new skills to drive future success. Now, yes, I mean, to be honest with you, I do agree with the respondents of the poll to say it's everyone's responsibility. It's society, it's leadership, it's individual, it's anyone, any player. They are responsible, yes, to upskill, but then you've got to have the motive and the incentive. Who's driving that? Who is monitoring? Who is evaluating? And definitely the answer is setting the tone up at leadership level.
Yeah, brilliant. Bandu, you were about to come in as well.
yeah, so I mean, I'm a strong believer of self-leadership as a way of operating, and that comes from being responsible for spotting the trends and learning about new things. But I recognize everyone is not like that. It's definitely a senior leadership responsibility. I think because they set the expectations, they set the tone, the culture, they design the support that is needed for the skills development. But then, I worked for an organization which is about 1,000 years old. Okay, and where I was introducing a new way of understanding spending. Going beyond this classic spend to value, integrated reporting in commercial world, I suppose. And it does require resilient people, curious people, definitely, people who can self-learn, and people who are resilient to challenges. So the question I would say, those that are listening to our call, is that how you, is that your professional identity? And if so, you have to learn, and then you have to do demonstrator projects and be prepared that others will be challenging you and your ways of thinking. But that's part of the game, because seniors also lack time. They don't have the time that someone at junior level may have to do that investigation and tell them, look, this is wonderful. This is how, this is why we should do this, because this is how it will transform our business, the impact that we create for our stakeholders and our customers. So it requires the curiosity, learning, resilience to be open to be challenged, but ultimately seniors have to be convinced. So if you're not that senior person, so if you are that senior person, I think invest in learning so that you can, but if you're not that senior person, I think invest in your own learning, but please take it in front of your seniors and be prepared to be challenged, be resilient, and keep, because this is the world we are facing. AI is coming, like Lynn said, there is almost every problem that we are facing, there is a better way of doing it, and probably can be automated. So that's my take, Alistair.
Well, I like what you're saying as well, because you're highlighting the fact that when we're talking about digital skills very generally, there's actually probably very different priorities depending on the level of seniority, depending on what and depending on what role you're in. And so we sort of need to look at the requirements of each role. So if you're in the sort of C-suite, and I think something that Joshua, you've shared before, this sort of breakdown that Microsoft had between productive skills and consumptive skills. So those skills to actually sort of create and use technology versus consumptive, the ability to sort of understand and use the outputs of a particular technology. There's probably an extent to which these skills are relevant to one level of seniority or one sort of job type more than others. I wonder if you have any reflections on where the sort of productive skills, so the more sort of technical skill set, might actually be applicable to accountancy and finance professionals.
Yeah, sure. And actually, indeed, like to understand the gap and how to close this gap is, yes, we've got this disseminate and understand the nature of these skills. And as you made reference to that, we looking into every area of those skill gap, like we found gaps in cloud computing, data analytics, cybersecurity. But yeah, I understand these are the areas where the skills gap is needed. But then going deeply into understanding the skills gap, yes, we're splitting the gap between, as you mentioned, between productive skills gap and consumptive skills gap. And where do finance professionals sit? Are we consumers of technology? Or not necessarily technology, but understanding technology? Are we consumers or are we producers? Now, interestingly, the survey highlighted the fact that the financial services as an industry is high in productive skills, which is interesting. But then looking particularly into finance professionals, we are more on the consumer side. I mean, looking at what we do is like basically we analyze, we read, we interpret, we respond. But as Dan, for example, made reference to, is like we don't need to have understanding or knowledge of coding or writing a program. We are just interpreters of and users of digital technology.
Interesting. And final question I have on this, and then I want to move on to the next section. I have a feeling we're going to come back to a couple of those topics as well in the next section when we talk about uses of generative AI. But there is sort of some sense that we can get very focused on specific analytics capabilities, on data visualization capabilities, on modeling, on sort of feature engineering, or however deep you want to go into it. Whereas the most important skill may simply be the ability to make good decisions with data. And that's something that is lacking. And I think there's a general sense, and I've seen a survey run by DataCamp, for example, where sort of over 70% of respondents felt like they lacked the ability to make good decisions with data, despite the fact that they had various other capabilities. I was wondering if the panel had any quick reflections on that particular idea, that it's actually the decision-making side that we should probably be focusing on, and especially given the sort of business understanding, the other understandings of value that as finance professionals we do have, we should be well placed in that regard.
Yeah, I absolutely think that there's a conversation to be had there. I would sort of correlate it with periods in my career where I've been working a kind of a requirements definition type role, trying to draw out what the requirements are around an analytics product or a report or a data set. And you have to push quite hard and invest in that conversation to identify exactly what the answers are what the questions are, sorry, that you're trying to answer. So I think absolutely you can be on the production side and you can produce a dashboard that you think is amazing, and you've got this data set and here you are, this is all of the ways of slicing and dicing this data, great, but have a chasm between that and what your senior leadership are actually tussling with in terms of their day-to-day decisions. So I think absolutely you have to take that business analysis kind of approach to it, put those two sides in the room together and go, okay, what are the issues that you are currently grappling with? What are the decisions that you're trying to make? how can we use it, and make sure that, I suppose, it's a business case, isn't it? It's an investment decision, but where you spend your time in terms of the data and the assets that you have, to make sure that they are in sync with the problems that your board and your senior leadership are grappling with.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's familiar with sort of just basic data science approaches, the CRISP-DM model, which is all about is the sort of starting from what data you need all the way through to coming out with useful full outputs. There are critical inputs for people to have a solid understanding of their organization and their objectives. And Bandhu, I know you've sort of gone into this area, and so you probably have a really good sense of where your background as an ACCA member, someone who's qualified in this sort of accountancy finance world, where those skills really gave you a leg up in understanding and making the most out of data science capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lynn touched on it as well. So firstly, that was my first point, was that we should not forget our value add as a profession, and what actually the organizations expect from us. And because we can get easily distracted by these data science algorithms, but the demand for finance data to drive decision making, that's not going away. You can introduce and the role of us as professionals that we bring into the table, the judgments, the decision making judgments, that's not going. So firstly, I think we should not, we really double down on that business partnering and the advisory skills. And then the second one, then how do I become a better consumer of data science products? You can move into that data science production side of things as well if you want to, can be learned, coding, etc. But the first priority for the finance professionals has to be is being really clear about the value that we bring to the table in terms of making those decisions with finance perspectives. But then secondly, that how do we continue to be a better consumer of data science products so that we can challenge them, So I have been recipient of data science products, and some just basic financial questions around how did you, the data quality, the governance, that we actually do it without even thinking when we're producing any report. And how much basics is missing in that space, and how much the value actually that governance angle when they bring in that. How did you assure quality? How did you, what's the primary source? What's the secondary source? Who validated this? All these questions that we ask when you're preparing financial reports. So it's being that better consumer and continue to play our role, as business partners and advisors, but also those that come from an audit background. I think you have a seriously strong advantage in this space, because that part I feel is missing often in data science products, so it's knowing really well our basics and being the better consumer, understanding some of the courses, doing some of those courses and understanding the language and the questions we can ask. I think that's how we can, continue to maintain our position in the organizations while adapting to these new technologies and guiding them to do better as well. They look at finance teams for those support.
I think that's an interesting space. It takes some of the pressure off as well, I think. So being an informed and engaged consumer, as opposed to feeling like we need to do everything or know everything, because that's how sometimes it comes across if you just sort of read the latest accounting article. It's sort of the next set of skills that accountants must have in the future. So yeah, thank you. Let's move on to the next section. We have a final quick poll question. Just curious to what extent our audience has actually engaged with artificial intelligence. Here we go. It's popped up for me. Let me know if anyone is struggling to see this. But we're just curious to what extent people have actively considered or are currently in the process of adopting AI in some way in their work. interesting mix of responses so far. Very interesting. So at the moment, it's very much kind of reflecting some results that we got from a survey that we ran in March for the Digital Horizons project, which is due to be launched in September. But we're looking at between a fifth and a quarter of people who are in some way using AI in their workflow, but most people are still trying to identify a use case for themselves. Also interesting about the skills, because I think there's a lot of pressure, especially around the concerns, which we'll touch on in our next set of questions, some of the risks associated with artificial intelligence. See that some people do think the risks are currently too high. Interesting, brilliant. So it does look like the vast majority of people either haven't been able to identify a clear use case or lack the skills to seriously consider the adoption of AI at this particular point in time. And I think that's probably quite widespread. I think, as a sort of class of technologies, artificial intelligence is certainly transformative in many ways. And I suspect we're all quite excited about the potential of AI to help us streamline certain processes or improve our forecasting and reporting work, for example. And if anyone else's inbox is like mine, we're probably awash in potential use cases, but we haven't quite figured out how to make them practical yet. So I'm curious to know from the panel, do you have any sort of early thoughts or guesses on where AI, and in particular generative AI, because that's the sort of hot topic in the newest development, where it might help your work?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think we've already identified a couple of examples, a couple of use cases in our business that are almost like, oh, they're the obvious thing. My gosh, why didn't I think of that before? It's that creative mindset. It's that coming to work with a kind of a blank page almost, and a fresh approach to the processes that you're completing, and going, okay, how could I do this differently? You really have to kind of change your mindset. And then the opportunities start to pop up. There's really obvious things, sort of automation. I'm assuming we're incorporating robotic process automation into our definition of AI for these purposes. I'd suggest. So just it's that what are the things that I'm doing today? Take a step back from it and think, okay, is there an opportunity to do that differently? That's for the people who have not yet identified a clear use case. You will be surrounded by them. You just have to take a step back for a moment from your day to day. And take a bit of a critical look at those things, and they will pop up. I saw a great example. It also depends on where you are in your journey, in your digital journey. So the title of this discussion was "What's on the Digital Horizon?" and I felt approaching it kind of depends where you are, where you're standing, what's on your horizon. But I've been a Power BI user for quite some time, and I saw a great little video online recently where you can take some Power Query code, copy and paste it into ChatGPT, and it will clean your code and narrate it for you for other users. And I mean that's just for a Power BI user, that's just, oh my God, that's amazing. But you wouldn't necessarily think to do that yourself. I guess there's something here around spending a little bit of time going and consuming some of the thought leadership stuff that's out there. If you're not on LinkedIn, get yourself on LinkedIn and start reading. There are loads of people putting really interesting stuff out there around what AI can do for you. So even if that's your first step, then that will be valuable, just to go out there and start reading up a little bit on what other people are posting and suggesting, to give yourself examples of what's possible.
I can share a couple of examples. So if you are, and by the way, I've got no affiliation with Microsoft, but because I know this product, I'm sure other vendors have got similar thing. If you are in that Microsoft family, Power Automate is a fantastic tool. And something that we've used in my last role. It's not AI, but it's automation. So if you're getting lots of Excel files, on a monthly basis from, from various business units. And then you're saving somewhere and then you're doing some kind of a cleaning exercise to generate some kind of report. The whole thing can be automated. Something that used to take, I think, my team, at least a week worth of work, designing some workflows, and you don't need to code anything. It's actually Microsoft even offers free training. The whole thing we managed to like 1 hour, from 1 week's worth of work to one hour, and so people who shared the data with us, it even straight away within seconds gave them a benchmarking report back, with a really nice charts and graphs, So that's the power of, some of the automation, and readily available. These are called no-code or low-code tools. So if you're in Microsoft family, do investigate that. They offer free training. And so that's one. The second one is around generative AI. Is if you're still running a financial literacy courses training, I think this is where it can be really useful. Using your own data, I remember explaining in meetings like what is accrual, what is prepayment, how to forecast, what to consider, what are the assumptions. You can actually use ChatGPT trained on your data to train people how to better interact with the reports, with your reports, the responsibilities they have in doing some kind of forecasting that you want from them. So this is another one, can be really useful. And there are, then of course you can go into like really hardcore forecasting, looking at lots of data sets. But I think those are the two that I would say I think can be done quite easily, quickly now. One is Power Automate to automate your workflows, and second is use ChatGPT for financial literacy trainings. You don't have to share any, any data that you don't want to share, but you can use that to help people understand, interact with you better around core tricky finance concepts.
It's a really interesting use case that you're referring to at the end there around financial literacy. And so I've seen people, for example, using it to interact with complicated regulatory documents, so that you can essentially sort of chat with the document to draw up specific aspects, which we can get into in a second. There are risks associated with to sort of help them explain metrics they're using to a lay person. So in sort of simple terms, to help them to sort of present to other parts of the business, maybe outside the finance department. So there's some really interesting ones there. I don't know if Josh, if you had anything else to add to that before we move on to some of the risks.
Indeed, I would like actually to share something about AI. The perception of people about AI. Yes, you find people around me like they are very excited, happy to use it. They're using it like inside work and outside work even. But then the perception is that it may make jobs redundant, and this is somehow a perception among organizations. But actually going deeply into it, is my thinking is that let's say if you have someone in a workplace using AI, and the work becomes really efficient. So if AI is doing the work of, let's say, 5 employees, then imagine across your organization, imagine the exponential impact on your productivity. So I'm not saying that necessarily you need to get rid of some of your staff members, but if you are having, let's say, 10 employees working in an organization, okay, these 10 employees can produce a work of 100 employees using AI. So then imagine that on the scale of a nation, what impact would it have on the, let's say, UK economy or the GDP of the UK? So this is how I would like to approach, or I thought about this idea. I thought like, okay, this is nice, like sharing it with the audience. So before I jump into what are the threats of AI, AI is still controversial. You find people really on one extreme, loving it and excited about it, but on the other extreme, like they don't want it, they don't want to use it because it's risky, it's bringing threats to humanity, to using data, protection, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth, which I will go and mention a few of them. So coming into the threats or the risk that AI may come in, there is still question marks on how AI can be harmful to human being. Let's say, for example, Tesla ramming into the sidewalk of the streets, and maybe a like physical threats to human being. So this is one threat. But looking at other slabs, like people call it hallucination. Let's say this is the slang terminology, but it refers to bias and data ambiguity that AI can bring in. So, for example, like hallucination occur when AI model generates an output different from what is expected. Simply put, it's a made-up statement. So that the AI is bringing. Another threat is data privacy. So privacy is a major concern when AI users or since users are like often storing data into the model for, let's say, training purposes, then the overarching factor that puts, like, for example, this is an example that I read. Italy, for example, banned ChatGPT on the basis that it's not legally authorized to gather user data. Germany has followed suit as well. Another threat is cybersecurity. The advanced capabilities of AI models can cause cybersecurity concerns. Attacker could use these tools for easy malicious code generation. There are copyright issues. So AI models are trained on massive amounts of data collected from the internet and from all users that are engaged with AI. And basically, the AI model can generate an output. So that puts a question: who's copyrighted that? So who assumes responsibility? Um, um, another risk is, let's say, if you allow AI to operate on a patient in a surgery, who is responsible for AI committing any risk to the patient, which can lead to the death of the patient?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really interesting risks that probably sort of have an impact over a different range of sort of timelines and levels of development. I think you raised some really important ones, and we know sort of right now there's a class action lawsuit against OpenAI that's just started in the US around fair use of training data, which could determine the future development of large language models, around privacy. Sort of that it sort of raises questions of, again, technical understanding, so using APIs in a safe environment, and then what happens to the data you put into a model. Even around bias, there's a certain level of technical understanding that's required to know that the bias of a machine learning model is not the same as the bias of a human brain. And so we need to deal with those two things very differently, and understand those things differently. So to what extent, well, I guess first of all, what is your sort of red line, I guess, in terms of use of generative AI at this moment? And then secondly, do you think that some of these big risks can be effectively controlled for sort of safe use within your organization, for example?
So the bottom line is that getting rid of AI is not going to go, but at the same time, the sky is not going to fall. So the resultant is managing and controlling AI, and that's why there there was this letter that was signed by seniors of large organizations, basically asking governments to intervene and think about regulating AI. Otherwise, AI can go wide. But as I said, AI is there, it's not going to go. So
Yes.
we are living it. We will live with it.
Bando, I
I
think you're
think-
about. Oh, sorry, Lynn. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, no, that's fine. I think in terms of red lines, my instinct is at the moment, anything from the GDPR point of view, anything that's personal data or PII is not going anywhere near AI at the moment for us. The large language models and anything that's commercially sensitive. But in terms of consuming and drawing knowledge and information out of it, the sky's the limit.
I think what of course, totally agree with some of the comments made by others. Risk management, sort of, where the sort of accountancy is about delivering trust, right? But that's where it comes down to. We're the custodians of trust. So anything that impacts our ability to deliver the trust, that could be trust of our boards, trust of our stakeholders, trust for the public, I'm very much going back to the first principle here, so the challenge with AI is black box. We don't know, so if we don't understand it, we should continue to challenge it. And if someone cannot explain it, that's a disclosure risk for us, and we just should not let it pass through. So that is sort of definitely the first thing in terms of red lines. That's my sort of, I would very much work with first principles here if I am, holding the pen on a financial reporting, that I am in charge of delivering trust. And for that, I need to understand, and if you cannot explain, it's not going through. So ESG is another one concern, I think. So going beyond sort of, because I think the public, so I work in public sector, but it's very similar in private sector too, I think. Sort of this, environmental reporting, social, being fair to the whole society. So data collection needs to reflect that, and algorithms needs to take that into account, So as well as the regulatory challenges, I think Lynn mentioned, also the impact on ESG and how AI impacts that, because that may not be black and white, so it's that gray area. How do we sort of deliver our ESG commitments and make sure that AI application of AI does not disrupt that, So those are my red lines. But in terms of, I've got blue lines as well. There is this fear, of course, there's AI is going to take our job. I think Joshua touched on this. The blue lines are, there are also lots of new industries are being created as we speak around clean tech. We all know about driverless car. These are all application of various AI technologies, the way we manufacture our food, so there is a lot of exciting new jobs that are coming too in this space, and accountants will continue to play their role. So it's not just about what jobs I'm not going to have, but also let's look at this new industry. And one of the books that keep me sane in this space that I'll share here, I think it's called A History of Mankind, Sapiens, 70,000 years of continuous history of innovation. It hasn't made us redundant. It has actually made our life richer. So take that positive mindset, it's not going to make us redundant. It's just going to make our life job better, make our life better. And look at all these new industries coming where we can, take advantage of.
Can I link that back into something that Bandu mentioned earlier on as well, in terms of the value add the finance profession can bring in this kind of space, the generative models being so new, and just building on what I mentioned earlier on about consumption, the professional skepticism, it's drilled into all of us, and that's a layer that we can really bring. Absolutely goes without saying that anything that you're consuming out of any of the large language models, we can apply that level of judgment and assurance in terms of what we rely on. But yeah, otherwise, completely agree with you, Bandu.
Right. Well, I'm glad we could end on some very positive notes there as well. And just on that point, also on the point of being made redundant, I was looking at some Bureau of Labor statistics, as well as ONS statistics. And I mean, the number of accountants are only growing year on year. Our numbers haven't declined yet. So fingers crossed things stay that way. But I think the points that Bandhu and Lynn and Joshua are making point exactly to that. That it's an absolutely critical function. The knowledge and the level of sort of trust and accountability that goes along with that, the ethics that are a big part of it, are going to be crucial for the safe adoption of AI in organizations across the world. And so we're sort of just beginning this discussion. That is the beginnings, I think, in terms of using some of these tools. I see there are a couple of questions which around, I think that there's clarification on what we mean by AI, which is a very good point, which probably should have picked up on at the beginning, and then you sort of expanded it out there, including RPA as well, and certainly intelligent process automation. But I think it reminds me of an old joke in computer science, which is artificial intelligence is just everything that machine learning hasn't figured out yet. Which is just to say it's whatever, it's a nothing term. And there is some truth to that in the sense that AI is just a group of technologies. And probably what we're referring to in large part are forms of intelligent process automation, forms of machine learning. Even generative AI is a form of machine learning at its base. Yes, I don't know if there's any sort of comments on that, but also I see there's a point made by James here around, let's see, assuming AI is being applied ethically, the biggest risk is bias in the learning data. I guess, would you generally agree with that? And also, I guess, what does it mean to apply AI ethically? I think we probably touched on some of that in terms of the grounding it in so trust, the role of accountability, and grounding it in the sort of basic learnings.
Yeah, I've mentioned before, I think for me, I think you treat it like a new joiner to your organization. You treat it like a little bit like a new member of staff, and apply the same sort of sense checks and rigor as you would to anything that anyone else brought you. It can just bring you that stuff in at a fraction of the time, but still, absolutely, as you've mentioned, take it with a pinch of salt until such time as we're a little bit further down the road.
I've heard a variation of that, which is that treat it like an overconfident junior.
Absolutely.